Okay. All right. You want me to look at you?
You can look at me or look at the camera.
Okay. Well, I'll look at you. That's
Okay.
quite all right.
So that way it's still kind of.
I understand. I understand.
Okay. Well, you started at Charlotte College in what year?
I came to Charlotte College in the summer of 1963 and taught that second summer session of 1963.
What did the campus look like when you arrived?
Well, it was very sparse. There was the Macy building, the Kennedy building. There was the original library building, which is no longer the library building. And there was the original part of the Cone Center. There were no dormitories. It was a gravel parking lot. It was very sparse, very sparse.
How did you get to Charlotte College? I mean, how did...
I got my PhD at Emory, and I was actually trained in modern European history with an emphasis on the Soviet Union, Tsarist Russia. And I simply was made aware of the fact that the job was available, and the man who was the chair of the history department at that time, Bob Reiki, who also became an historian of the campus, had been at Emory and had some personal contacts. He invited me up for an interview in January of 1963. And it was a bitterly cold day. It must have been 5 degrees. I mean, it was so cold it was unbelievable. Went out to the campus, and it was all very informal in those days. Just essentially meeting with the chairman, and that's how I was hired.
So you met with him before you met Bonnie Cone?
I did, and the meeting with Bonnie Cone was brief, and it didn't leave a very lasting impact. It was primarily meeting with the chairman at that point. I had later meetings with Bonnie Cone, obviously knew her very well, but not with that initial contact.
When you came onto campus, or when you joined the school, how many faculty were there?
There were 60 some. I think it was in the mid-60s, and there were far less than 1,000 students. I think it was 800, 900 students at the most. It was very, very small. You had very much a sense of it being a place that had great potential for the future, but it was just in the making. It was just beginning.
How did the faculty work together? I mean, what was the overall feeling?
It was like a family. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody knew everybody in every department. When the faculty met, we all got together in one room. It was a very sort of pioneering effort. You felt like almost that you were in a wagon train going across the prairie. I mean, it was a very small, intimate kind of place.
So everybody knew everybody.
Everybody knew everybody. Absolutely. There was, the people in the physics department knew everybody in the English department. That kind of thing.
Well, since at that time it was not part of the larger system, was there a feeling that people might move on to better things and leave? Or?
Well, no, because it was, when I came, they had just added the junior year in 1963, and they added the senior year in 1964. So there was a major expansion, substantial expansion of the faculty that was occurring at that time. Most of the faculty was made up of 3 types of people. Either individuals whom Bonnie Cone had personally known and recruited, people like Mary Denny, for example, who was chair of the English department, or Pierre Macy, who was chair of the foreign language department. These are people that she had personally known and recruited. Or it was people who were sort of near the end of their careers, or young folks like me. But, you know, when you're 25 years old, which I was when I joined the campus, you normally and naturally think about, well, how long will I be here? But I was really glad to come to Charlotte because my wife had grown up here and we had some roots here. I'd grown up in North Carolina, so I didn't have great aspirations to move on to some other place. Now that might have existed with some other people, but it did not exist with me.
Well, since Charlotte wasn't as big then, what was it like going to campus? I mean, was it like, did it feel real far away?
Well, certainly there was a greater gap between the city and the campus as far as development, but really it wasn't that much different than it is now. Now, Highway 49 was 2 lanes, not 4 lanes. But no, there wasn't a great sense of it being different in that respect.
In Ken Sanford's book, I read about how Bonnie Cone would have dinners and she would invite students and she'd have dinners and invite faculty.
Well, that's right. Now, I was never invited to her home. I was never a part of that scene. But, you know, there were socials, for holiday socials for the faculty. We would get together. I remember one time, as I best remember it, that they were going to have some Christmas holiday celebration for the faculty, and Bonnie Cone canceled it because liquor was going to be served. But it was a much more, it was just a very different place as far as feel was concerned then.
What about the mentality or the attitude of the students that were there?
Well, a lot of them were very appreciative of the opportunity to have a college education because many of them came from families that no one had ever had a college education. They were all commuting students. They all obviously lived within driving distance. And again, there was this sense that we were going to give them the best undergraduate education that we could possibly give them at that new school. I mean, that's, even though it was not new in terms of its roots going back to 1949, that was the general feel of the place, that we were doing something exciting. We were doing something new. We were plowing new soil. This was the feel for the campus.
So there was an excitement.
It was very exciting. It was very exciting, and it was very, you almost felt somewhat like you were almost an educational missionary. Of course, part of that had to do with the spirit of the times, too. The 1960s were a time of great expectation of what was possible for us as not only a school, but a community and a nation to be able to achieve.
I guess jumping over to the buildings,
Yeah.
the way the school looked.
Yeah.
Most people, when they go to class, they don't think about the building they're going to take a class in. They just go to school and take their class and go home.
Right.
So when you were going out there to work, did you ever think about the buildings? How did they impact you, if at all?
Well, I wasn't nearly as sensitive to architecture then as I am now, but I did not dislike them. In some ways, the the buildings were somewhat austere, but they were also pointing toward the future and newness. They were all brand new. They sparkled like a diamond. And the thing that really struck me the most about the campus when I first went on it was not so much the buildings as the setting of the campus atop that hill. That as you walked west on that central walkway, sidewalk, you could look off and see that ridge line. And I remember some very beautiful sunsets. So I didn't think that much about the buildings. I remember the first office that I had. It's a great story. It had formerly been, it was in the Macy building. It's where I had my first office. And I think I had that office for 3 or 4 years. I can't remember how long it was. But it had formerly been the snack bar. And it had a drain in the middle of it, so that if I rolled my chair back from my desk, I'd start rolling back. And Bonnie Coon came in there one day and saw that. She didn't realize that I had that drain in the middle of my office. And she said, no faculty member of mine is going to put up with that. And she had workmen there within the hour to fix it.
So that used to be a place to go and eat.
Yeah, they obviously, it was kind of like where they did the food. I think it was
like a soda shop.
Yeah, kind of like a soda shop, yeah.
And that would have been in the administration?
It was in the Macy building.
Okay.
Because that's where Bonnie Cohn's office was, in the Macy building. The dean's office was in the Macy building. So, you know, the Macy building served many purposes. The initial faculty meetings occurred in the Macy building. So,
is that where registration would go on?
You know, I don't remember where registration occurred. My earliest memories of registration are somewhat later than those years.
Talking about the architect who designed the buildings.
Oh, yes.
When I spoke with that Walter Boast, who worked with Odell, he said that was their bread and butter, was doing designs for schools, both the city and Mecklenburg County.
Right.
They were split.
Right.
So he said it was not unusual for them to design a school.
Right.
But how would you describe the style of those buildings?
Well, it's typical A.G. Odell Jr. architecture. He absolutely despised any indication of tradition or of historic reference. He was all about using the principal tools of modern building materials, glass and reinforced concrete and aluminum. And the buildings are what they are. They stand for a particular moment in time. And part of the reason for the great popularity of that type of architecture, that modernist style of architecture, had to do with the fact that we felt we were building a new world. You know, what did the past represent? The past represented pain. It represented World War II. It represented World War I. It represented things that we felt that we were moving away from. So, you know, Odell was part of that movement, definitely. Now, there were things about those buildings that were always irksome. One is you had to get a special key to open the windows. You know, you'd think that you'd like to be able to open a window. You have to go get a special key to open the window. And also the ventilation systems in those buildings have never worked properly. You're either too cold or you're too hot. So there have always been things, those flat roofs, God bless buildings with flat roofs are always problems. But they are what they are. You know, they were, and the fact that at least many of the buildings are faced with brick was sort of a way for Odell to use a more traditional building element within the confines of his style.
One of the things I read, and I can't remember where I read it, but I think it was in Ken Sanford's book from the minutes from the Board of Trustees, and I think it was one of the Belks, and he had said that he wanted every brick to be a North Carolina made brick. He wanted it to be from the state. I thought that was interesting that they would do that.
Right.
How do you think the teaching has changed there as the school has grown?
Oh, good gracious. You know, everything, the emphasis, I mean, we were expected to get our PhDs and we were expected to do some research and publication. I'm not suggesting that we were totally devoid of that. But everything, the whole emphasis, there was no graduate education. There were no graduate degrees. There were no MA degrees. There were no PhD degrees. Everything was geared for the undergraduate. And everything was geared toward being an effective teacher. That was the most important thing. Classes were never bigger than 30 students, maybe 32, 33. Well, the school is simply, it's not a matter that it's not any worse, it's not any better, it's just different. And it's now just, it's like the difference between a Walmart and a mom and pop store. You know, I came to a mom and pop store in 1963. If you go in a mom and pop store, you know, the person behind the counter is going to talk to you, might ask you how your dog is or whatever. You go into Walmart, there ain't nobody going to talk to you about that. They've got a pre-programmed sales pitch to give to you. Well, in many ways, UNCC's just a big school with, in terms of resources, in terms of the traditional credentials of the faculty, it's a far stronger institution than it was in 1963. But, you know, change always cuts both ways, and it's true of UNCC as well. I'm sure that if I went to UNCC today, A, I'd never be hired, and B, I'd never get tenure. I mean, you know, because my strengths tend to be, I think I've been an effective teacher, and I think that, you know, I'm sort of a non-traditionalist. UNCC is just different. It's very different. Now, everything is geared for the graduate students. Everything, everything is geared to make the school a prestigious research university. And that's why you have undergraduate classes of 150 students, because they want to get those undergraduates through there and put the emphasis on the graduate programs, because that's where the money is.
And more people are coming from all
Well, that's right, and you know that I'm not saying that's a bad thing either. Yes, the fact that we got dormitories. I remember those first dormitories that were built. Everybody said they looked like Stalin designed them. But that did change, very much change the nature of the place when we started getting resident students there.
How involved were other faculty members with the community? I mean, was there a lot of back and forth, or were they pretty much just their own?
I think that depended on the person. I know, for example, in my Charlotte College years, I was not involved that much in the community. I think it was, Bonnie Cone was incredibly involved in the community. Bonnie Cone had come out of the community. I mean, she'd been a school teacher here. She was, but no, I don't think most faculty were that much. I don't think it would be any different in that respect than it is today.
Just depended on the individual.
That's right.
How involved was Bonnie Cone with her recruitment, or what did?
Oh, Lordy me. Bonnie Cone did everything. Bonnie Cone was everywhere. It was Bonnie Cone. I remember they was talking about the spirit of the times. I remember in 1963, 1964, when someone would ask me who was president of the school, and I'd have to give the name of a woman, I was a little bit embarrassed. Which, that doesn't say anything about Bonnie Cone. It primarily says something about me, particularly at that particular time, because you just didn't expect that then.
Was that a shared sentiment?
I think there was a general appreciation for the unbelievable commitment of this woman to making that school happen. It would never have happened without her. She did everything. She made sure the grass was cut. She knew the students. I'll tell you a great story. I have a family member who had flunked out of another college, and his preacher, the minister of his church, called Bonnie Cone to more or less attest to the good qualities of this young man who had gone astray, and asking her to allow him to be admitted to Charlotte College. And because Bonnie Cone decided that was a good thing to do, she did it. He went on not only to graduate from Charlotte College, but to get a graduate degree and become a leading official in his church denomination. So Bonnie Cone made that decision. I remember Bonnie Cone selected the silverware and dishware for the cafeteria. That was her life. It was her life. She was absolutely, totally committed to that school. It was incredible to witness. She could be very tough. She was no sweet lady. She was a savvy lady and somebody who was determined to make it happen.
Everybody that I've talked to said she was determined and devoted, and they respected her.
Well, you couldn't help but respect her because there was nothing phony about her. I'm not necessarily sure I'd particularly, like to live in the house with her, but she was a formidable person. She was very analytical, very, very street smart, knew how to make things happen.
Once the school gained the larger the status of being she remain president?
No, it wasn't long before she stepped aside and Dean Carver became the chancellor. She served initially, but it was always expected that she would step aside. And I would say one of the things that was the most remarkable about Bonnie Cone was that she did that with grace. There are a lot of human beings that cannot do that. They cannot be totally in charge of something and then take a somewhat less position. But she was willing to do that, and she did that. I am sure that, I think, I have no evidence for this at all, but I think that the Consolidated University wanted one of their own people. And Dean Carver had gone to Mississippi State from North Carolina State. He was a known entity. He was one of the, quote, North Carolina educational establishment. And I'm sure that that had a lot to do with the fact that he became the chancellor.
How was that received by the faculty?
That he became the chancellor and that Bonnie Cone stepped aside. Sort of, that's just the way it was. There was no great. She wouldn't have allowed that to happen. She knew it was the best for the school. And that's what she always kept first and foremost. What's the best for the school?
What was it like? Were you there? Do you remember when there was a celebration in the morning about it becoming part of the...
Oh, absolutely. The Bonnie Cone had telephoned back from Chapel Hill that had become part of the greater university system. And, you know, they have that bell out there that is right there by the bell tower. Anyway, they roll this bell out. They now use it at graduation. They roll it out. Well, they roll that bell out and they rang it. And the students gathered around and started yelling, "Beat Duke, beat Duke, beat Duke." Because they were so excited to be part. Because at that time, there were only 4 campuses of the university. Now there's 16. There were only 4. Chapel Hill, Raleigh, Greensboro, and Charlotte. So, it was greatly, but it was, we all thought that's where it was headed. Even when we came in 1963, we thought that was where it was specifically headed.
That's what it felt like.
Absolutely.
It would only get bigger and not go away.
Right. Now there was some fear that the school was not going to make it. I remember Hugh McInerney, who came as the dean under Chancellor Carver. This was post-Charlotte College. But I remember him sitting us down as a faculty and reassuring us that it would succeed. And it obviously has.
Were there any big changes that you personally noticed between Charlotte, when you were working and it was Charlotte College, and once it became part of the larger?
You mean immediately? You know, I've talked about how the school has changed over time. No. There was no...
it was business as usual.
Business as usual. The transition was seamless.
Well, is there anything that you can think of I haven't asked that you want to say?
No, I think I about covered it.
Did you work long days? What was it like?
Well, yes. We taught so much because, for example, now I'm on a 2-2 teaching schedule. That means 2 courses one semester, 2 courses the next semester. I was on a 4-4. And I remember teaching 3 sections of the same course, like the introductory history course, 3 sections of it. Now what they'd do now, they were all like 35 students. Now they'd put them all in one room. They'd put them in a... You know, I think that Charlotte College and the University of North Carolina at Charlotte still face some of the same challenges. Becoming really sort of viscerally and part of the community that Charlotte really does understand. I think a lot of people, if they went out to that campus today, would be absolutely shocked by what's there now.
Do you think a lot of the people that are there now, that are going to school there now or working there now, know what it was like in the beginning? Maybe. Well,
I don't think most human beings know much about, you know, I used to ask students what was the event that they felt that had the greatest impact on their lives. I never had a student select something that occurred before they were born. And I think, no, I don't think the students know. I don't even think the students know why the Cone Center is named the Cone Center. They might think it had something to do with an ice cream cone. And I bet they don't have much of an awareness of the fact that the woman's buried right over there on campus. I don't think she'll be the only person ever buried on that campus. And I think that's very appropriate because indeed it was her life. But you know, I think I look back on those early days. I've always been a better pioneer than a settler. I mean, that's just my nature. Here I am, 73 years old. I'm still thinking about, what I'm going to do and starting new things and trying something else out and doing all this. And so it was a very, very, very exciting time. Mary Lynn could tell you stuff about what it was like to be a faculty wife in those days.
I'm sure it was different than being a faculty wife now.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially since it's so big.
Well, it used to be on your resume, you always put whether you were married or not and who your wife was and how many children you had. You're not even allowed to do that anymore. The lawyers have taken over. The lawyers and accountants have taken over.
What were you teaching when you first started?
Oh, I was teaching modern European history and Russian history. That's what I was teaching.
Will you teach the same thing each semester?
Well, switch some. The basic course you always taught, but some of the upper division courses, you'd shift off.
When do you think that the university started branding itself towards this research?
Oh, it was during Woodward's chancellorship. It was, that's a matter of record, but it was, I'd say, in the 1980s. It's when the school started. And it all has to do with money. I think part of the, I read about things that, in fact, I wrote the faculty about that. The idea that we would have to worry about our personal safety on that campus. The fact that we would have to worry about whether or not we were going to get robbed in a parking deck. Well, we didn't even conceive of that. And I think that the campus was well, you know, it was just a different place. It was a different place. And I think it's, I don't know the extent to which UNCC sees itself as really something that's trying to uplift and transform. I don't know. They probably do, but certainly that was what we saw in Charlotte College, that it was going to make a real difference, that we were bringing a public institution of higher education to Mecklenburg County, and there'd never been one here before. And we were going to make it the most exciting, dramatic, undergraduate, liberal arts education that we could give them. That was the whole focus.
And people needed it in the area.
That's right, that we were responding to a need and giving a college education to people who otherwise probably would not have an opportunity to get it.
When you did that research report for Gehringer,
Yeah.
did you come across things you didn't know when you were working there? I mean, was there any sort of...
Well, you know, I didn't really have a full appreciation for Odell. I didn't get involved in preservation until the mid-'70s. So I'd already been at UNCC 10, 11 years before I ever got involved in preservation. I didn't have much awareness of Odell, and really not that I was not that much aware of Gehringer's role in bringing Bonnie Cohn to campus, or rather bringing her to Charlotte, and that really sort of started the whole game, because without Elmer Gehringer, who was principal at Charlotte Central High School, Bonnie Cohn would have never come to Charlotte. And if Bonnie Cohn had never come to Charlotte, I guarantee you that school would not be there as it is today. People always make the difference. You know, if you want to find something that's happened that is truly new, you have to find somebody. You know, the great things in human progress don't occur because of block charts. They occur because of people, and people being in the right place at the right time. And that's what Bonnie Cohn was for Charlotte College.
It was either in your book or in Ken Sanford's book, but I read about how I think it was Gehringer thought she related well to young males, and most of the students going there were young males, and he thought she'd be perfect for that role.
I got you. I can't remember whether. Of course, she was. I interviewed a gentleman, Martin Waters, who was a World War II survivor, who had her as a teacher at Central High School. And he said that she was an excellent teacher. And I'm sure she was an excellent teacher. And she taught mathematics. I'm sure she was an excellent teacher. She had a very vibrant, vivacious, broad smile. You know, she was a very, very engaging person. Had wonderful powers of cajolery.
People like being around her.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. She was somebody that you could not ignore. You could not ignore Bonnie Cohn.
I think Ken Sanford said that, you know, Ken Sanford, he said Tom Belk told him, well, you just have to realize when she calls you, you're pretty much going to say yes to whatever it is she wants and just have a nice conversation with her.
Well, I think that's right. She would not be deterred. She would not be deterred. You know, that's the root of determined. I mean, she would not be deterred.
I think for this video, that's going to have to be a big theme throughout, because everybody I've talked to brings that up. And for the paper, there might need to be more of a focus on the buildings, but for this video, I think it might need to have. Because it's so many personal stories about her that people tell.
Right.
So it might need to be more about the people, and then the paper be more about the... I mean, it could be about Odell and the firm and bring that into it too, but...
Well, Odell was, you know, he was a man who was not one to compromise well. And I think I might have told you the story that I talked to someone one time who said that he saw Odell slap his wife full in the face in public. Odell was not one to hide his lamp under a basket. He was absolutely wedded to the concept that architecture was something that should help to change the world. It was not just providing functional space. That if you looked at the buildings, you understood that the hope of humankind rests with tomorrow. It does not rest with yesterday. And Odell would look at some of those buildings they're building now, like that Health and Human Services building with that funky cupola on the top. He'd throw up. Because it serves no function. It's like a cherry on an ice cream cone. Well, it isn't even that good. It serves no function. What do you need a cupola for? You know, you should not. You know, Odell was big for a lot of windows, a lot of glass, a lot of natural light. It was all about controlling the internal temperature by mechanical means. That's why you can't open the windows. You look at those buildings, and except for the brick, try to find something that reminds you of the history of this area. It simply is not there. You know, in the Bauhaus in Germany, where Odell didn't study there, but he certainly would have been influenced by it, they didn't even teach architectural history. They didn't want to teach architectural history. They didn't want them to know architectural history. You know, history in many ways is depressing. I mean, if you want to believe that anything is possible, you better not study history.
What do you think he would think if he was there today?
Oh, he'd be very disappointed. He would be very disappointed that that all of those buildings over on the west side of the campus where the research stuff is, with all those big old column porches and pediments, and what in the world are they doing that for? He'd think they were stupid.
That Walter Boast, he said it's like there's two campuses now.
Oh yeah.
There's like two campuses.
Right.
He said there's the original section
Right.
campus.
Right.
And
Right. And Odell would think that, you know, what have they been doing? And that was largely Woodward's decision to go with that more traditional architectural look.
As a means to promote the school?
Well, yes, I think he thought it would be more attractive to the local business community. But Odell would be intensely and severely disappointed. And he would scoff at it because he gave them a template to build on. And that template was not adhered to.
They turned away from that.
Yeah. Exactly.
I guess Mr. Bose said their main competitor at the time was Pease.
Yeah, J&P's, that's right.
But that they were pretty much, they were doing a lot of work then.
They were, and J&P's was basically in the same modernist tradition. Pease was the designers, for example, of the original buildings at Central Piedmont Community College. Now, some of the buildings that have been done since the first campus, Odell would like Harry Wolf's Covard building. I think he'd like that building. But the Health and Human Services building and those research triangle building.
Do you think he'd like Murray Wisnett, the row?
I mean, that would be much more acceptable to him.
Would he like Stores?
Which one,
The
Stores?
architecture, the one that Guampi.
Oh, yeah, I think they would certainly be more acceptable to him. It's when they went into that, it's the Fretwell building would just make him sick. It's those that faux historical stuff that would drive him nuts.
Did you ever meet A.G. Odell?
I did, but he didn't give me the time of day. I did meet him. He was debonair, sort of the celebrity architect type, very aware of his own presence. Not a man of great humility, but he made an enormous contribution to the architectural form of the time, and I admire his work. I'd much rather be in the Geringer building than in a building with a big old columned porch on the front of it and a cupola on the top.
What have you liked personally about where your office is now in the Geringer building? Do you have any strong feelings either way about that building?
Well, I've already told you about the fact that the cooling and heating system doesn't go very well, and it drives me nuts. I can't open the windows. But maybe the fluorescent lighting gets to me sometime, a little bit. But I think that I like where my office is. I have no problem. The real problem on that campus now is people don't feel safe. That's not really Odell's fault. That's not the campus's fault, but they just don't feel safe.
It's the surrounding environment of the campus.
Right. I bet if you had a night class and you were walking out to one of those parking decks by yourself, you would feel apprehensive, wouldn't you?
Walk fast. I always walk fast at night.
And are very aware of your surroundings.
And people like to walk out with when your class disbands, you all walk out together. I guess
Is that it?
I'm done, I think.
Well, that's terrific. I hope it was
I
useful.
think it will be.
Well, I'll be animated.
You will be.